Hey guys, this is a continuation of my video series here on Rook 2d2 of how to play against the King's Indian defense. If you hadn't had a chance, please check out my introduction video and the video of 9h6. In this video, I want to share with you guys a common mistake Black makes in this variation of the King's Indian defense. I mentioned this in the annotations of the 9h6 video of what happens after Black plays 13f4, and the reason I didn't include it in that video was because I thought it deserved its very own video, because this was the real reason why I started playing this variation of the King's Indian defense. See, in the King's Indian defense, Black's main idea is he wants to play f5 followed by f4 and start a kingside pawn storm. And in this variation of the King's Indian defense, Black is actually unable to do that, because if he does that in this variation, he is going to be exploited for the slow plan, and White will be able to quickly spring a queenside attack on him, which always leads to clear advantages if White knows what he's doing. So let's get right into it. So I'm going to just pick up where we left off with 13f4. If you have a question about any of these moves, please consult the 9h6 video. But now right here, we're going to go into 13f4. So this is a bad move, because Black's attack is much slower than White's. So White continues with knight c4. And here I've got a diagram of roughly how White continues in this variation. The ideas are White plays knight b5, putting pressure on c7 and d6. Will eventually take on d6, making d6 a backwards pawn. White will also continue with rook c1. And the reason I've got this arrow coming out from the bishop is to show that at one moment we can trade off our bad bishop for Black's good light squared bishop by moving it to g4. Also, we have dominance over this d1 h5 diagonal, which makes it nearly impossible for Black to ever play h5 g4. However, Black does try to play these ideas of g5, g4, and h5, and that's why I have these arrows showing here. But as you'll see in all these lines, Black never gets a chance to ever play those moves because it's too slow of a plan and he's mostly reacting to White's moves. So from here, there's two lines. There's g5, which is the main line that I come up against the most, and there's a king h7 line. So let's first go over the king h7 line. So king h7, the idea behind this is Black is freeing the g8 square to maneuver his knight to a better position on f6. White continues with c takes d6, creating a backwards pawn on d6 and opening the c file for White to begin creating weaknesses on the queen side. Black takes back. Now queen b3. Now in this variation of king h7, compared to the variation with g5, White can move his queen to b3 because Black hasn't had the chance to play g5, and we don't need the queen as much on this d1 h5 diagonal. So we can get it more into play on the queen side by moving it to a square such as b3, supporting our future pawn push of b5 b6. Black continues with knight g8, and now we go with the plan of playing b5. Now here, we're going to try to create weak squares on the queen side by advancing our pawn to b6. This is either going to create a hole on c7 if Black pushes a6, or it's going to create weak squares along the b file if Black takes on b6. So Black's best way to continue is trying to defend his 7th rank with rook f7, b6, and as I said, there's two lines here. So first we're going to look at a takes b6, and then we'll move back to a6. So a takes b6. This is the main line is a6. This is the weaker of the two lines. So after a takes b6, Black has created weaknesses on b5 and b6. White continues with rook ac1. The reason we don't take back immediately is we don't need to. That pawn is going to fall, so we can focus on regrouping our pieces to take advantage of the c file and the weak squares on the b file. Black plays bishop f8, already starting to protect d6. And now we take on b6, threatening the rook on a8 and taking advantage of the b6 square. Rook b8. This is really the only safe square for the rook. And now White plays a4, preparing an a5 push to solidify our knight's position on b6. Black continues with knight f6, putting pressure on e4. We play a5, rook c7, trying to get some control over the c file, which will not end up working. f3 controlling e4, so we can move our knight away from the c3 square. Rook c5, and now knight ac4. And the idea here, well, first of all, white is clearly better. Black cannot take on a5 due to threats on c8. We're threatening to take on c8 after rook takes c8, queen b7 check. And here, black's best way to continue is actually by trading rooks on the c file, followed by hoping for some counterplay with a g5 push, followed by knight h5, and maybe ideas of sacking the knight on g3. Now white is going to simply continue controlling squares on the queen side with moves like bishop b5 and regrouping his knight from a4 via b2 c4, putting pressure on d6. And as you can see here, black is mostly reactionary to what white's doing, and this is a good position to be in. So now let's move back to what happens after a6, the main line. So here, black has created a hole on c7, and we will play rook a to c1, starting to take advantage of that. Knight f6, rook to c2, preparing to double our rooks on the c file. Bishop f8, and here again white is clearly better. As you can see, black is very reactionary to white's plans. White will continue with knight a5, putting pressure on b7, followed by rook fc1, doubling up rooks on the c file, and at the proper moment he'll move his c3 knight to start the attack on the c file. Whereas black is going to try to regroup his pieces. He'll possibly move his rook to b8, freeing his bishop from protecting b7. He may move bishop e7, and then he needs to really focus on protecting his 7th rank and hoping for some counterplay on the king side, which may not be possible. So now let's go back to the g5 line. Okay, so g5. Okay. Now this is by far the one I get the most in practice. And black tries to start an attack on the king side. However, our queen and bishop along the d1 h5 diagonal is going to give him great troubles ever advancing his pawns. So now we continue with rook c1 and knight g6. So here, black's knight and dark squared bishop are in very restricted positions. So black is trying to improve the position of his knight and hopefully have it contribute to a kingside attack. So as white, we're going to continue with bishop h5, questioning the black knight and forcing black to somehow solidify its position. And here there's really two continuations. By far the best continuation is king h7. Knight h4 is not a good move. However, I get it a lot in practice, so I do want to show you guys how to handle this. So here, black moves his knight, trying to support an f3 push, and also putting pressure on white's king side. However, this knight currently has nowhere to move without white being able to capture it. So we're going to take advantage of that by pushing g3. So here we're threatening to capture the knight, but also we have to note that we are weakening our king side. However, here, if you play it correctly, we always end up in a better position, but we need to be aware of black's counterplay. So black plays d takes c5, an in-between move, getting us stopping us from creating a weak pawn on d6. He doesn't want to deal with that, so he eliminates that. So we take back, and now he plays g4. And the idea behind this is he's trying to open up his queen along the d8 h4 diagonal so that in the event of us capturing on h4, he can regain his minor piece by exploiting our bishop's lack of free squares. Okay, so how we continue is we actually take on g4 with our bishop, the best continuation, and here we don't give him as much counterplay as he would get if we took on h4, took the knight on h4. Take on g3, h take g3, queen g5, threatening our bishop. Knight e3. Now the idea behind this is we're protecting our bishop while keeping some control over the f3 square, which black is trying to exploit. So black continues by taking our bishop, queen takes, knight f3 check, king g2, and now knight d4. And here, white is decisively better. We're up a pawn. We have two strong knights against black's strong knight on d4 and his bad bishop on g7. And how we're going to continue is we are going to trade off queens. and then we're going to try to push d6 to open up the d5 square as an outpost for our knights. We'll also be able to use the newly open H file after we've traded off queens, and really here black's mostly going to react to what we're doing. He's got several weaknesses. He's got 3 pawn islands where we've only got 2, and he's really at a great disadvantage here. Okay, so now let's go back. Since we know knight h4 is not a good move, let's go back and see what happens after king h7, the main line. So now we play c takes d6, capturing on d6, creating a backwards pawn on d6. And also we opened up the c file. c takes d6, knight b5, threatening d6, forcing black to protect his pawn in an unnatural way, which is going to be rook f6. Also, we're putting pressure on the c7 square. Rook f6, knight a5, freeing the way for our rook to control the c7 square and the c file. Also, we're putting pressure on b7. Okay, bishop d7. Now this is actually the best move for black, and it's because he's exploiting the tactic of if we take on b7, he'll play queen b6, queen b6, and he'll actually get into an okay position after that. So here, what we're going to do is we're just simply going to play knight to c7, putting our knight right in the square and starting to get some control over the e6 square. We're also threatening to now take on b7 as well as taking on a8. Rook b8, protecting b7, moving away from the knight's attack. Rook c3. Okay, so here, again, white is clearly better. He has taken control of the c file and the c7 square, and from here, white is going to continue by gaining control over the e6 square, inserting a knight into there. He could do this by moving his bishop to g4, as I show in the diagram here, trading off light squared bishops, and then inserting his knight into e6. White will also want to move his other rook to the c file to continue taking advantage of the weak squares over there. And as far as black goes, he needs to regroup his pieces because right now they're not cooperating with each other. He can start by possibly moving his rook to f7 and then remaneuvering his dark squared bishop and knight, but basically, again, this is all reactionary. And this is the end of the lines I want to show you for today, but I want you guys to really see that this is not a good line for black at all. All these positions, we're getting into clear advantages, and black is really suffering. So if your opponent ever tries to go for this idea, punish them for it. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I really appreciate all the feedback I'm getting. I got feedback from someone who said they'd really tune in if I incorporated Star Wars into every video. So I'm going to sign out with, may the Force be with you, and please subscribe and listen to any comments below.